Australia's about to be completely changed. I mean, you're Australia. Today, the Morrison government released this Intergenerational Report. That's a look at how our economy is going to change over the next 40 years. It's a little bit, anyway, whatever. But none of the commentary I've seen seems to have understood exactly what is about to hit us. Let's start with our birth rate. In this report, it says, well, to keep the people that we have now without immigration, this population, we need every woman in Australia to have on average just over 2 babies, 2.1 to be precise. And we haven't done that for decades. Australian women have only 1.65 babies on average, and this report says it's going to go lower again for the next 40 years. Which means, of course, our population should shrink. Instead, this report says it's going to soar from 25 million today to nearly 40 million in 40 years. And that's because of mass immigration. Which means, when you look at these figures, that nearly half, the nearly 40 million Australians that are going to be here in 2060, will have been imported, them and their future children. Nearly half. We'll be shopping overseas for half our population in the next 40 years. Now, can you imagine how that's going to change us now that we've got not assimilation, but identity politics, multiculturalism, the new anti-white racism, the new anti-West rhetoric, and of course, we're sourcing increasing amount of our immigration from outside Europe. So imagine what Australia's going to be like. Here's the thing, it might be great, might be fantastic, might be exactly what you want. Wonderful, broad-minded. But of course, we have no option anyway, do we? This report says we're living much longer, our society is getting much older, so our healthcare funding must double. And who's going to come and work and pay for all this and clean all those bottoms in aged care? I tell you, look around, this Australia is going to all but vanish. Perhaps for the better, like I say. Some people love the idea of a nation of tribes. Joining me to discuss the implications of this report is Australia's best finance writer, Terry McCrann of the Herald Sun. Terry, I don't want to thank you for your time. I'm not going to go on all the social things. I get enough trouble there. I don't want to drag you into my pit of trouble when it comes. But mass immigration, we are absolutely hooked now on mass immigration, aren't we? That's going to be our meal ticket.
Good evening, Andrew. You've identified the most credible part of the report, which is really a statement of the bleeding obvious, that if we import 200,000 people a year, every year, forever, as you say, the population will change dramatically and it will be even more a nation of migrants. But for the rest of the report, it's got as much credibility as those climate change models that forecast what's going to happen to the climate 30, 40 years into the future.
Well, talking about climate, let me first, before I get to the bad news, because I think there's some really shocking things here, apart from what I just said. Climate, we're told global warming is going to, threaten the end of civilization, maybe wipe out humans. By the end of the century, we'll all be toast. Yet this report says, actually, life expectancy is going to go up by a lot. Another 6 years for men, another 4 years for women. Average life expectancy for women then will be 89. It doesn't look like the planet's going to fry them to bits. But that also means that we're going to be spending a hell of a lot more on the elderly, doesn't it? And how are we going to pay for everything?
Well, indeed, Andrew. But let me just focus on that for a moment, because all this assumes all sorts of things are going to happen, mostly positive things. As you say, with climate, that yes, we'll have net zero, but we won't have ridiculously high power prices. We'll have this marvellous, miraculous world where we get as much energy as we want from wind and solar, and there's no cost, and it's all just works so perfectly. So what you're talking about in all these projections is it comes out of a computer model, and it's exactly the same computer. It's exactly the same model sitting in Treasury. Now, I don't want to bring it back to another reality that, as we know, those computer models that Treasury uses each year to predict what's going to happen to the budget just 12 months out, to the economy just 12 months out, are always wrong. It's a question of how wrong they turn out to be. And we're talking in this context about projections which are supposed to go out 40 years. So, yes, as I said before, if we do bring in 200,000 people a year, We know we'll get bigger. But beyond that, we haven't got a clue about what sort of world we'll move into, in certainly in the case of Australia, but in more generally in the world around us. I mean,
well, I've got to say that one financial projection that it does make is one I totally agree with. In fact, I think I've read in your column endlessly. We're going to see budget deficits for a long, 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 long time. And I think that's only inevitable when the number of workers for every person over 65 is going to go from 4 workers paying for every person over 65 to less than 3, 2.7 in fact. I think that's only gloom ahead of us. Terry McCrann, I'm afraid that we're going to have to cross to a press conference probably later from the premiers and the Prime Minister faffing around about this, crisis. So thank you very much for your time.
My pleasure, Andrew.